The morning Eleanor Cole left her ranch, the sun rose the same way it always had, slow, golden, and indifferent. The land looked peaceful from the porch. The fields stretched quiet beneath the pale sky, the fence lines running like old scars across the property. Nothing about the view suggested an ending, but Eleanor knew better. She had learned over 70 years that life rarely announces its hardest moments with thunder. Sometimes it arrives softly, like dust settling on forgotten furniture. She sat in the wooden chair her husband built decades ago, hands folded in her lap. The chair creaked when she shifted her weight, the sound familiar enough to feel like conversation. The ranch house behind her stood tired but proud, paint faded by seasons that no longer belonged to her. The letter lay unopened on the small table beside her, yet she didn't need to read it again. The bank's decision had been final weeks ago. The cattle were gone, the savings were gone. The future, she understood, was gone too. Eleanor pushed herself to her feet slowly, her knees protesting in the quiet morning air. She walked to the fence line one last time, running her fingers along the rough wood her husband once repaired every spring. "I did my best," she whispered, unsure whether she was speaking to the land or to the memory of the man buried beneath the lone cottonwood tree. The wind moved gently across the fields, carrying the dry scent of earth and distance. If you've ever had to leave something you loved behind, you know how quiet that moment can feel. Inside the house, a single suitcase waited by the door. Eleanor Cole took one last look across the ranch and then stepped back toward the life she no longer recognized. The wagon wheels groaned like old bones as they rolled along the narrow dirt road. Eleanor Cole kept both hands steady on the reins, though the horse knew the pace better than she did. The animal moved patiently, as if it understood that there was no real destination waiting ahead. Behind her, the ranch disappeared slowly into the pale horizon, until it became nothing more than memory. Eleanor had packed only what she could carry: clothing, a few cooking tools, her husband's pocket watch, and a small tin box filled with letters she hadn't read in years. Everything else had been sold, traded, or left behind for strangers to claim. The road stretched endlessly across dry prairie land. No towns, no fences, just wind moving through tall grass like whispers she couldn't quite hear. For the first time in decades, Eleanor realized she did not know where she was going. That feeling unsettled her more than losing the ranch itself. All her life, she had been needed somewhere, as a wife, a neighbor, a caretaker of land and animals. Even in hard years, there had always been work waiting in the morning. Now the day stretched open and empty. The sun climbed higher, warming her shoulders through the thin fabric of her dress. She adjusted her hat and kept her eyes forward. "Just keep moving," she murmured to herself. The words sounded steady, but they carried no certainty. By late afternoon, the horse slowed on its own near a shallow creek crossing. Eleanor stepped down carefully, her boots pressing into cool mud at the water's edge. She let the horse drink while she rested against the wagon wheel, breathing in the quiet. The world felt very large without a home inside it. Somewhere in the distance, dark clouds gathered slowly along the horizon, though Eleanor did not notice them yet. The wagon gave out just before dusk. Eleanor heard the sharp crack before she felt the shift beneath her feet. The left wheel lurched sideways, splintered wood collapsing under the weight it had carried too many miles. The wagon tilted hard, forcing her to grab the side rail to keep from falling. The horse stopped immediately, ears flicking back in quiet confusion. "Well," Eleanor said under her breath, steadying herself. "That's that." She climbed down slowly, inspecting the damage with hands that had repaired tools, fences, and saddles for most of her life. The axle had split near the hub, the old wood finally surrendering to time. And it wasn't something she could fix alone, not with the daylight fading and the cold already creeping into the air. The land around her had changed without her noticing. The prairie grass had thinned into rocky soil, and low hills rolled across the distance like frozen waves. Winter lived here longer than it did in the valleys she'd known. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The sky darkened quickly, clouds spreading across the fading light. The temperature dropped with the kind of speed that only happened in open country. She unhitched the horse and tied it near a patch of dry grass, then gathered a few small branches from the ground. Her fingers moved slower than they once had, but memory guided them. Soon a small fire flickered beside the broken wagon. The warmth helped, but it did not solve the problem. Eleanor sat on a flat stone, watching the flames struggle against the wind. For the first time since leaving the ranch, uncertainty turned into something heavier. Night would be cold, morning would bring no answers, and the road ahead was now impossible to travel. In the distance, just barely visible against the dim hills, a faint lantern light flickered once, then disappeared. Eleanor noticed the lantern again, just as the fire began to fade. This time it moved. A slow, steady glow approached across the darkening land, rising and falling with the rhythm of a horse's steps. Eleanor stood carefully, brushing dust from her skirt, unsure whether to feel relieved or cautious. Out here, strangers could mean help or trouble. The rider stopped several yards away. The lantern light revealed a tall man in a worn coat, while his hat pulled low against the wind. He studied the broken wagon first, then Eleanor, his expression unreadable. "You'll freeze out here tonight," he said. His voice was calm, not unkind, but distant. "Wheel gave out," Eleanor replied. "Didn't expect it to last this far anyway." The man dismounted without another word and walked to the wagon, crouching beside the damaged axle. His movements were efficient, practiced. He touched the cracked wood once, then stood. "Can't fix that in the dark." Eleanor nodded. "I figured." A long silence settled between them, filled only by the soft movement of the horse and the wind passing over the hills. "There's a ranch half a mile east," he finally said. "You can stay there tonight." He did not say my ranch, but Eleanor understood. "That's kind of you," she answered. He lifted the lantern again, and already turning back toward his horse. "Bring the animal, leave the wagon, I'll look at it in the morning." There was no invitation in his voice, only practical necessity. Eleanor stamped out the small fire and gathered her things. The man waited, without speaking, the lantern casting long shadows across the ground. As they began walking across the dark land together, Eleanor sensed something familiar in the silence between them. Not hostility, loneliness. The ranch house appeared out of the darkness slowly, its shape emerging against the low hills as the lantern light swung with each step. It was smaller than Eleanor expected, built from rough timber that had weathered many winters. One window glowed faintly from inside. The man opened the door and stepped aside without ceremony. "Fire's still alive," he said. You can warm up." Eleanor entered carefully. The room smelled of wood smoke, leather, and long solitude. A stone fireplace burned low, just enough to keep the cold from settling into the walls. The space was neat but spare. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall, and tools hanging in careful order near the door. No decorations, no photographs, no signs of a shared life. The man set the lantern on the table and removed his hat. "Rowan Hale," he said. "Eleanor Cole." He nodded once, as if names were only practical things. Rowan added a piece of wood to the fire, kneeling close to the flames. The light revealed lines on his face that came from weather and years rather than age. He moved like someone accustomed to silence, comfortable inside it. "There's stew left," he said, gesturing toward a small iron pot near the hearth. "Still good." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before serving herself. The warmth spread through her hands as much as her stomach. She hadn't realized how cold she'd become on the road. Rowan did not eat. He sat across from the fire, watching the flames instead. "You live out here alone?" Eleanor asked. "Yes." No explanation followed. The wind pressed softly against the cabin walls. Somewhere outside, a loose shutter tapped in uneven rhythm. Eleanor finished the stew and set the bowl down gently. "Thank you," she said. Rowan gave a small nod, eyes still fixed on the fire, as though conversation required more effort than work ever did. Eleanor woke before sunrise, the habit of decades refusing to leave her. For a moment she forgot where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling, and the faint smell of smoke, and the steady quiet of the hills returned all at once. Rowan's bed was empty. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside into the cold morning air. Frost clung to the dry grass, and the sky was just beginning to lighten at the edge of the world. Rowan stood near a small corral, repairing a loose rail with slow, deliberate movements. The rhythm of hammer against wood sounded steady, almost comforting. "Morning," Eleanor said. Rowan glanced up briefly. "Morning?" She watched him work for a moment, noticing the way he avoided wasting motion. Every strike of the hammer landed clean and sure. "Got another hammer?" she asked. He studied her for a second, then pointed toward a small tool crate near the fence. Eleanor picked it up and moved to the opposite side of the rail. Her hands remembered the work easily, and the cold wood, the weight of the hammer, the careful pressure of each nail, all of it felt like returning to a language she hadn't spoken since leaving the ranch. Rowan said nothing, but he slowed slightly, matching her pace. The sun rose higher, turning the frost into thin mist across the ground. Together they finished the repair in silence. Rowan stepped back, testing the rail with one firm push. It held. "Good," he said. Eleanor wiped her hands on her skirt. "Still useful, it seems." Rowan looked at her more directly this time. "Didn't think otherwise." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't distance either. For the first time since leaving her land, Eleanor felt something small and steady return. Not belonging, not yet, but usefulness. And usefulness, she knew, could grow into purpose if given enough time. By afternoon, and the wagon had been pulled closer to the ranch. Rowan worked quietly beside the broken wheel, examining the split axle with the same careful attention he gave everything else. Eleanor sat on an overturned crate nearby, sorting through a small box of old nails and metal scraps she'd found in the barn. The air carried the dry smell of dust and wood. "It can be fixed," Rowan said finally. "Just not quickly." Eleanor nodded. "I'm not in a hurry." That answer seemed to surprise him. He set his tools down and rested his hands on the wagon sideboard, looking out toward the hills rather than at her. "Most people don't stay here long," he said. Eleanor continued sorting nails. "Most people aren't trying to find somewhere to begin again." The words lingered between them. Rowan exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to continue. "Town used to be closer," he said, "before folks stopped coming this direction. What changed?" He hesitated. There was trouble a few years back. Men passing through. One of them started something in town. Eleanor waited, sensing the unfinished truth. I stopped it, Rowan said, but not the right way. The wind moved across the open land, carrying dust along the ground. They remember the fight, he continued quietly. Not why it happened. Eleanor looked at him now. And why did it happen? Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. He was hurting someone who couldn't fight back. Silence followed. That all? Eleanor asked gently. Rowan picked up his tools again. No, he said. But it's enough. He returned to the broken axle, ending the conversation without anger. Just certainty. Eleanor understood the boundary. Still, yet something had shifted. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt shared. The first sign of trouble came as a thin line of dust rising along the southern road. Eleanor noticed it while hanging damp cloth near the porch rail. At first, she thought it was wind moving across the dry ground, but the dust held its shape, growing taller as it approached. Riders. Rowan saw them seconds later. He didn't react immediately, but Eleanor noticed the stillness in his shoulders. The same stillness she'd seen when he spoke about the past. How many? She asked quietly. 3, Rowan said. He set down the tool he'd been using and walked toward the corral, checking the gate latch without appearing hurried. His movements were calm, but deliberate. Friends? Eleanor asked. No. The riders reached the yard faster than Eleanor expected, and their horses were lathered with sweat, and their coats carried the dust of long travel. The man in front dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground with confidence that felt practiced. Rowan Hale, he said. Rowan stood near the fence, arms relaxed at his sides. Didn't expect you to find me, Rowan replied. The man smiled without warmth. You knew we would. The other 2 riders stayed mounted, watching Eleanor with mild curiosity. She stood on the porch, hands resting lightly on the rail, her heart steady despite the tension building in the air. We're not here for trouble, the lead rider said. Just unfinished business. Rowan didn't answer. The man's eyes drifted toward Eleanor. You keeping company now? He asked. She's not part of this, Rowan said firmly. Eleanor felt something shift in the air, not fear, but gravity. And the rider nodded slowly. Good, he said, because what happened back in Red Hollow still stands. Eleanor didn't know the name, but she understood its weight. You broke a man's jaw and left town without settling it, the rider continued. Folks there remember. He deserved worse, Rowan said. Maybe, the rider agreed. But towns don't run on maybes. The wind creaked the porch boards beneath Eleanor's feet. We'll be in town until tomorrow, the rider said, stepping back toward his horse. Figured you'd want to come finish the conversation yourself. He mounted smoothly. If not, he added, glancing once more at the ranch, we'll come back. The 3 riders turned and left as steadily as they had arrived, dust rising behind them again. Rowan remained where he stood long after they disappeared. Eleanor stepped down from the porch. Red Hollow, she said softly. Rowan nodded once. Some pasts, Eleanor said. Don't stay buried. No, Rowan replied. They don't. Rowan began packing before sunrise. Eleanor heard the quiet movement from inside the cabin, the careful opening of drawers, the soft clink of metal tools being gathered together. She lay still for a moment, listening, already understanding what he had decided. When she stepped outside, Rowan was tightening the saddle straps on his horse. You're going to town, Eleanor said. Rowan nodded without looking up. They won't stop coming, he said. Better to finish it. And me? Eleanor asked. Rowan paused, then walked toward the wagon they had been repairing. He picked up the small pouch of coins Eleanor had been given in town days earlier and placed it carefully on the wagon seat. You'll go the opposite direction," he said. "North Road. There's a farm settlement 2 days from here. Good people." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You've already decided?" "Yes." The word came too quickly. The morning air felt colder than it should have. "I didn't ask you to protect me," Eleanor said. Rowan finally met her eyes. "I know." "Then don't." Rowan shook his head slightly. "They're not dangerous men if they get what they want," he said. "But they won't care who's standing nearby if things go wrong." Eleanor studied his face. The guarded distance she had seen when they first met had returned, heavier now. "You're sending me away," she said. "Not just from danger." Rowan didn't answer. The silence confirmed it. He walked past her and picked up the small supply sack she had been using, placing it gently beside the wagon seat. You'll leave after I'm gone," he said. "Safer that way." Eleanor's voice softened. "You think being alone is safer?" Rowan's hands tightened slightly on the wagon rail. "It's simpler." "For who?" He didn't respond. The sun began to rise behind the hills, spilling pale light across the ranch yard. The same yard that had felt unfamiliar days ago now felt difficult to leave. Eleanor stepped closer. "Rowan," she said, "you don't have to carry everything alone." His voice was quiet but firm. "Yes, I do." He swung into the saddle in one smooth motion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rowan pulled the reins and turned toward the southern road. "I'm glad you came here," he said, without looking back. Eleanor watched him ride away, the distance growing with each step of the horse, and the sound of hooves faded slowly into the morning stillness. For the second time in her life, Eleanor stood in a place that felt like home, and prepared to lose it. Eleanor did not leave. For a long time after Rowan disappeared over the ridge, she stood in the quiet yard, listening to the empty morning. The wagon remained where he had left it, her small bundle of supplies resting on the seat like an unfinished decision. She walked slowly back toward the cabin instead. Inside, the kettle still sat near the stove. Rowan's tools lay neatly arranged on the table, exactly as he had placed them. The room felt hollow without him, but not abandoned. Eleanor poured water into the kettle and lit the stove. "If this is the last morning here," she said to the empty room, "it won't be spent running." The water began to warm. Outside, as the ranch waited, fences half repaired, the corral gate still leaning slightly, the injured fence line near the creek unfinished. Work remained everywhere she looked. Purpose remained. Eleanor stepped outside again, picked up the hammer Rowan had used the day before, and walked toward the broken fence. She worked slowly, carefully, her hands steady despite her age. Each nail she drove into the wood felt like a decision being made. The sun climbed higher. Hoofbeats returned near midday. Eleanor didn't stop working. The sound approached the yard, then slowed. A horse exhaled sharply behind her. "You didn't leave," Rowan said. Eleanor pressed one more nail into the fence post before turning. Rowan sat in the saddle, dust covering his coat, exhaustion lining his face. But the tension that had lived in his shoulders for days was gone. "Oh, it's finished," he said simply. Eleanor nodded. "I thought so." Rowan dismounted, moving stiffly as he stepped onto the ground. He looked at the repaired section of fence, then at the cabin, then back at Eleanor. "You should have gone," he said. "I already ran once in my life," Eleanor replied. "I'm done with that." The wind moved gently through the grass between them. Rowan gave a small, almost disbelieving shake of his head. "This place doesn't have much to offer," he said. Eleanor smiled faintly. "It has work," she said, "and quiet, and someone who understands what it means to start over." Rowan looked down at the ground, then back at the ranch. For the first time since she had met him, he didn't look like a man waiting to leave. "Fence line still needs finishing," Eleanor added. Rowan nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "Oh, it does." He picked up the other hammer. The two of them worked side by side in the afternoon sun, not speaking much, but no longer alone. And for Eleanor Cole, who had believed her life's purpose ended with loss, the sound of a hammer striking wood felt like something beginning again. If this story reminded you that it's never too late to find purpose again, consider subscribing to the channel for more Western stories about second chances, quiet courage, and unexpected belonging.